Okay, and the first step we usually do when we start our work with beauty retouch and when we get the picture off, we have to do a RAW conversion. Probably I don't have to do this because everyone knows this, but don't worry if you get JPEG image, you can follow my steps easily in Photoshop, but of course I have RAW image. I'm going to start with RAW conversion, and we always start with RAW conversion. We have to set up the colors, we have to set up the contrast, etc. Everything to prepare our image to make it comfortable to work in Photoshop. So let's start from the most basic things, which is down here. As you can see, we have some settings. I'm going to open this. And the first thing is color space. I'm not going to talk much about this because it's not that important, but just very quickly, we usually work with space Adobe RGB, the most flexible color space, the most popular. All the professionals work with this. And something a bit more important is depth over here. You have two choices, 8 bits channel and 16 bits channel. If you have an 8 bits channel, I recommend you to change this into 16 bits. We're going to get the higher color depth, which is very important when we work with lights. When we brighten up some areas, our depth is higher. We won't get any noise and anything like this. If you would work with 8-bit channel, our color steps are too large, so we can easily notice steps between one color and other color. We want something very soft, very deep, so I recommend you to work with 16-bit channel. Our size of the file will be larger, but it's just better for the image and for your workflow. In the next lesson, I'm going to explain a bit more about differences between 8-bit and 16-bit depth. Resolution, of course, is 300. It's resolution for printing, etc. And of course, about the size, I'm not going to resize this because it doesn't really matter, and I can do this later in Photoshop. So here's our settings. As I said, remember this and work with pretty much the same. I'm going to hit OK. And now let's work with Camera Raw and our settings over here. First of all, as you can notice, this image is pretty much cold. I want something a bit warmer, but not too much to not make this look too burnt. So I'm going to pull up just a bit the temperature to make it maybe suitable. So go slowly, and I think maybe around this, or maybe it was even too much. I think this is a bit more suitable. About tint, I'm not going to go, of course, into green colors because, as you can see, it doesn't look so well. So I'm going to keep this pretty much the same as it was. And I'm not going to go into magenta too much because, as you can see, this image will be too red. So I'm going to keep this universal as it was. Then, of course, we can work a bit with contrast. Just have a look how does it work. And I don't want to pull up the contrast too high, because as you can see, if I'm going to work with the hair later on, it will be a bit more difficult. So I'm just going to keep it natural, or even pull it down a little bit, but not too much, to make this area brighten. But what I recommend to not experiment with a contrast, because it doesn't have much point. But the thing I really do work is the shadows. As I was talking about the hair, they are a bit into darkness, and it's always retouching easier when it's a bit brighter. So I'm going to pull up some of the shadows. It's going to help me with retouch, and I'm not bothered about retouch because I'm about shadows, because I'm going to set them up later. Of course, about whites, we're not going to pull it down because it will be a bit more difficult, so a bit up. And blacks, can you do the same, but not too much. I'm just doing for this image. I find this easier for me to retouch. And the most important thing is here, temperature, and just a bit here. You can work and set up. You can actually pull down some shadows, and you have to make something very universal to work with Photoshop, but the most important are colors. And the last thing I'm doing, actually, I find this helpful for the texture. We can zoom this in, and as you can see, when we pull this up, our texture is a bit more visible. When we pull this up down, we actually soften the image, and well, as a result could be nice. It's not really nice when we're losing the texture of the image. So what I recommend you, add just a little bit clarity to make your texture more visible, and it always look good, because Beauty Retouch has to have some texture. We cannot smooth out the skin, but about this I'm going to talk a bit more later as well. So that's kind of basic steps. You can do something similar. Of course, that's the thing we just have to do. About vibrance, of course, you can work a little bit with this, but I wouldn't go down if we have some natural light. Saturation, I usually go out because saturation might be a bit distractive, so I usually don't work much about this. But okay, when we are done with this basic RAW conversion, we are ready to start working in Photoshop. Just make sure that everything is right. Work with 16-bit depth, set up your colors to make your image looking nice for working in Photoshop. So when you are ready, just open an image in Photoshop, maybe. Going to see a bit more here. Okay, open image, and now your image will be visible in Photoshop, and we are ready to work with our image.